Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night podcast. Story 1. The Father's Love Turned Monster. Welcome to Confession Night. Tonight we delve into a case that sent shockwaves across America. A case where paternal love was twisted into something horrific. The case of Jonathan R. Jonathan R. was not a social outcast living in isolation. He was a successful construction engineer living in a nice, spacious house in a quiet suburb. In the eyes of his neighbors, he was the model father, always taking his 5-year-old son, little Ethan, to the park on weekends and helping out in the community. Jonathan's life was the perfect image of the American dream. However, behind that closed door, a storm had been brewing for a long time. Jonathan was a deeply controlling man. He didn't just control the finances, he controlled the emotions of his wife, Sarah. When his business suffered a catastrophic failure and a massive debt suddenly loomed over him, Jonathan began to lose his footing. The financial stress quickly morphed into blind rage and despair. Sarah, his wife, was the first to sense the terrifying change. The lies about his income, the mysterious phone calls, and the sudden, unprovoked outbursts of anger became frequent. She decided she had to protect her son, and filing for divorce was the only way out. Sarah's decision to leave pushed Jonathan into the abyss of madness. In his sickened mind, losing Ethan was unacceptable. He could not stand the thought of his son growing up without him, or worse, growing up with another man. His fear and his damaged male pride twisted his love into a toxic, absolute form of possession. On one cold Friday night, Sarah was away finalizing legal documents. It was just Jonathan and Ethan at home. The child was sleeping peacefully in his room, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. Jonathan sat in the dark living room, staring at the shattered financial plan on the table. He believed that if he couldn't have Ethan, no one could. It was the only way to protect his son from the world he deemed toxic. He walked into Ethan's bedroom. The room was pale blue, filled with toys and lit by a faint nightlight. Ethan woke up, his innocent eyes looking at his father. The child wasn't scared. He just smiled and called out, "Daddy?" That very moment, that innocent gaze only intensified Jonathan's rage. His son's purity seemed to mock his own failure and desperation. Jonathan carried out his barbaric act coldly, silently. He chose the most horrifying method, aiming to ensure that the child would never suffer another ounce of pain again. Or so he rationalized to himself. When Sarah returned the next morning, she discovered the tragedy. Jonathan hadn't fled. He was still sitting there, beside his son's cold bed, his face completely blank, as if he himself had died on the inside. At the trial, Jonathan attempted to argue that his actions were an act of mercy, the only way to free his son from a miserable life he could no longer provide for. That defense only added to the horror of the case. He didn't regret killing his child. He only regretted not being able to continue the role of the perfect father. Jonathan R. was convicted and faced justice. But the greatest horror this case left behind wasn't the sentence. It was the chilling truth that sometimes evil doesn't emerge from the darkness, but from the person we trust the most. Toxic possession can distort the most sacred love, turning a father into a destroyer. The case of little Ethan is a cold reminder of the terrible things that can happen when a man loses everything and decides to drag an innocent life down to hell with him. Story 2. The Marriage Contract Written in Blood. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we step into the dazzling world of deception, where the marriage vows were rewritten in blood. This is the tragic story of Victoria C., a woman who paid the ultimate price for the greed and calculation of her own husband, Robert C. Robert and Victoria were the embodiment of a power couple. They lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Beverly Hills. Robert was a tech investor with a sophisticated demeanor, and Victoria was a beautiful, intelligent interior designer. Their photos regularly graced lifestyle magazines, always smiling, always holding hands. But it was all just a perfect performance. In reality, Robert was a desperate gambler and a pathologically controlling man. He had secretly drained the couple's joint assets, throwing tens of millions of dollars into online casinos and non-existent high-risk projects. His career was just a facade for a colossal mountain of debt, poised to collapse at any moment. Victoria was a meticulous woman. She began to notice the anomalies. Bank accounts suddenly closed, her husband's urgent late-night meetings that didn't check out, and the palpable stress surrounding Robert whenever she brought up money. On a fateful night, Victoria stumbled upon an envelope containing secret legal documents. They were threats from creditors, along with undeniable evidence that Robert had forged her signature to mortgage their home. Victoria realized her entire life was a lie. She had to get out. When Victoria confronted him, Robert showed no remorse. He became cold and cruel. For Robert, divorce wasn't just about losing his wife. It was losing the perfect shield to cover up his financial crimes. More importantly, he desperately needed her massive life insurance payout to settle his debts and maintain his facade. He decided that Victoria must die, and the death had to look like an accident or a botched home invasion. Robert meticulously planned for 2 weeks. He studied Victoria's routine, especially the nights she was home alone. He disabled the security camera facing the backyard, citing maintenance issues. He bought a burner phone to make a fake call, setting up a flimsy alibi. On the night of the murder, Robert pretended to leave for a business trip. In reality, he simply drove to a motel a few miles away, waiting. After midnight, he returned to the mansion through the back door, the lock of which he had previously disabled. Victoria was reading in the bedroom. When Robert entered, she had no chance to react. He acted swiftly, inhumanely, using a blunt object to inflict the fatal injury. The most chilling part was how Robert staged the scene. He ransacked the room, faking signs of a struggle. He took a few pieces of inexpensive jewelry, but deliberately left the diamond necklace Victoria was wearing, aiming to misdirect the investigation away from a robbery motive. The next morning, Robert returned and performed a flawless show of grief. He called the police, sobbing hysterically in the arms of the detectives. Everything seemed perfect until the lead investigator, Detective Miller, arrived at the scene. Miller was seasoned, and he noticed a deadly contradiction. First, an armed burglar wouldn't leave the biggest diamond on the victim's neck. Second, the broken window was on the second floor, a difficult point of entry, while the first floor doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry. The final crack in Robert's marriage contract came from an unexpected source: the home's electronic system. Although Robert had disabled the security cameras, he had forgotten one small, crucial detail. The motion sensor in the garage recorded the exact time a dark vehicle matching Robert's work car entered and exited the property during the time of the murder. This evidence, combined with the analysis of his debt and the life insurance policy, was enough for Detective Miller to arrest Robert. In the interrogation room, when faced with the irrefutable evidence, Robert's polished demeanor completely crumbled. He confessed everything, not out of remorse, but out of realization that his game was over. He killed his own wife to salvage a deceitful life that ultimately dissolved into thin air. The case of Victoria C. is a cold demonstration of how greed and control can turn love into a fatal trap, where happiness is merely a facade, and the ending was predestined from the start. Story 3. The Twin Curse. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we tell the story of a blood bond that should have been sacred and unbreakable, yet was poisoned by the most toxic of emotions: envy. This is the tragic saga of the twins, Daniel and Ethan K. Daniel and Ethan were identical twins, but they were two complete opposites. From birth, fate seemed to favor Ethan. Ethan was always the center of attention. He was smarter, better looking, and possessed a natural charisma. Ethan always won the sports competitions, received prestigious scholarships, and eventually became a successful corporate lawyer in New York. In contrast, Daniel always lived in his brother's dim shadow. Daniel struggled with school, lacked confidence, and ultimately settled for a mundane office job back in their hometown. He believed that his parents, friends, and the entire world looked at him with disappointment, constantly comparing him to Ethan. The simmering resentment in Daniel's heart grew into a malignant tumor of hatred. Every compliment directed at Ethan was a stab at Daniel's self-esteem. The peak of the tension came after their father's death. The will left a substantial estate, including a priceless, beloved lake house that both brothers cherished since childhood. The will stipulated that the house was to go to Ethan, who was deemed the more reliable heir. For Daniel, this wasn't just losing property. This was the final, crushing affirmation that he was a failure, even in the eyes of his departed father. The lake house became the ultimate symbol of everything Ethan had and everything Daniel could never achieve. One August weekend, Ethan returned home to finalize the title transfer of the house. Ethan, with the familiar carelessness of a constant winner, invited Daniel to the lake house to celebrate and help him clean up. While the two were making minor repairs, the tension escalated. Daniel made a final, desperate plea. "Split the assets, or at least let me have this house." Ethan, with a slightly condescending tone, refused. "I need it for my family, Daniel. You need to stand on your own 2 feet." That single sentence shattered the last remnants of Daniel's sanity. He looked at his younger brother, the one who had everything, the one who was always loved, and the hatred accumulated over years erupted into a violent frenzy. He no longer saw his brother, only the thief who had stolen his life and honor. The crime occurred that evening. While they were working, Daniel seized a moment of distraction, using a heavy hammer to attack Ethan from behind. His action wasn't entirely impulsive. It was the inevitable culmination of years of nurturing malice. After the act, Daniel tried to stage the scene as a construction accident during home repairs. He placed the hammer nearby and called the police with a trembling voice, feigning shock. However, the detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies. The location of the wound and the trajectory of the blow were inconsistent with an accidental slip. More importantly, investigators discovered that Daniel had deliberately tried to wipe his fingerprints off the hammer handle and several other objects in the house, a behavior inconsistent with someone who had just witnessed a loved one's accident. In a deeper investigation, police uncovered Daniel's journal, a chronicle filled with bitterness and hatred directed toward his twin. Daniel's life was one long indictment, fueled by jealousy. Finally cornered, Daniel confessed. He spoke of the burden of the twins' shadow, the pain of constant comparison, and the collapse when the lake house was taken away. He declared, I didn't kill my brother. I killed the shadow that was devouring my life. The story of Daniel and Ethan Cape is a chilling wake-up call. Unchecked envy is a double-edged sword. It not only kills familial affection, but also destroys the soul of the one who commits the crime. This twin curse wasn't one of destiny, but Daniel's choice to harbor evil in his heart. Story 4. The Betrayer's Last Supper. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we delve into the ultimate act of betrayal, where the most sacred bond in a family is severed by greed and ingratitude. This is the tragic story of the Harrington family and their only son, Jason Harrington. The Harringtons were a traditional, wealthy, and strict family. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington owned a successful business, and they had sky-high expectations for their son, Jason. They provided Jason with everything: expensive tuition, a luxury car, and a generous allowance, even though he was well into his 20s. However, Jason always felt suffocated. He wanted to be a musician, a free-spirited artist, but his parents forced him to study law and take over the family company. Jason lived under their absolute control. He was not free to date whom he chose or pursue the career he desired. In Jason's eyes, his parents were not protectors, but cruel jailers. Although Jason was well provided for, what he truly craved was not the money, but control over the assets to escape their mental grip. Jason knew that as long as his parents lived, he would never be free, and his inheritance would be indefinitely delayed. The idea of murder began to germinate in Jason's mind as a simple, permanent solution to all his problems. Jason spent months planning. He didn't want a messy, haphazard murder. He wanted a peaceful, painless death to satisfy his own warped conscience. His plan centered around a special dinner, a Last Supper, of which his parents were completely unaware. Jason told his parents he wanted to cook a lavish dinner to thank them for everything they had done. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington were deeply touched, seeing it as a sign that their son had finally matured and accepted the path they laid out. The dinner that evening was a perfect scene. Romantic candlelight, soft classical music, and dishes Jason prepared himself, while his parents happily enjoyed dessert, a special herbal tea. Jason secretly added a large, lethal dose of a powerful sedative he had surreptitiously collected. After his parents fell into a deep sleep, Jason carried out his heinous act. He used the very pillows they habitually slept on, placed them over their faces, and coldly ended their lives. There was no anger or panic in this act. It was an act of brutal, calculated indifference. The next morning, Jason called the police, putting on a show of a distraught son who had discovered his parents had passed away in their sleep. He feigned belief that it was due to a heart attack or stroke. The case initially seemed like a natural death. However, the medical examiner quickly discovered an extremely high concentration of sedatives in the victim's blood. This immediately turned the incident into a murder investigation. The detective noticed a significant contradiction in Jason's story. Why would a perfectly healthy couple need such a high dose of sleeping pills? And why did Jason, who discovered the bodies, not show extreme shock, but rather a strange, subtle relief? Police zeroed in on Jason's computer records and discovered undeniable evidence. A trail of search history regarding drug dosages, methods to cause undetectable death, and most importantly, documents outlining personal music projects scheduled to begin immediately after he was set to inherit the estate. When apprehended, Jason confessed everything. There were no tears in his confession. He simply stated, "They never let me live. I was just taking back my freedom." He genuinely believed that killing his parents was a liberation for both parties, liberating them from the life they refused to let go of, and liberating him from their suffocating control. The Jason Harrington case is a horror, testifying to the fact that excessive parental control can lead to manic defiance, and the greed of a child, once fully grown, can devour even the most sacred family ties. This Last Supper was not a thank you. It was a cold, calculated death sentence. Story 5. The Camping Trip Tragedy. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we tell a tragedy that unfolded under the pale moonlight, where the closest of friendships was torn apart by a secret and betrayal. This is the horrifying story of 4 best friends: Mark, David, Sarah, and Chloe. They were an inseparable group since high school. Every year they would take a camping trip deep into the national forests of Oregon. This year, the location was remote, far from any cell phone signal. However, the atmosphere this year was different. The usual camaraderie was replaced by furtive glances, cryptic remarks, and suffocating tension. The reason was a devastating secret that all 4 had buried together for the past 2 years. 2 years prior, during a drunken party night, they had caused a fatal car accident and decided to dispose of the evidence, swearing to keep the secret forever. Since then, this secret had become an invisible chain, binding them in fear and suspicion. Within the group, Chloe was the most mentally fragile. She lived in constant anxiety, plagued by nightmares, and recently turned to alcohol and drugs to cope with the guilt. Worse, Chloe had started talking and making friends with a stranger online, a person to whom she had accidentally revealed too many details about the night of the accident. Mark and David, the most pragmatic and controlling of the group, grew terrified. They believed Chloe, under pressure, would soon expose everything, dragging them all into the abyss. Chloe's existence became a direct threat to their lives and freedom. On the second night of the trip, after drinking heavily, David and Mark dragged Chloe out of the tent for a talk. They tried to convince her to stay silent, but Chloe screamed, saying she couldn't live with the guilt anymore and was going to confess. In the pitch-black woods, where no one could witness, Mark and David's desperation turned to violence. David was the first to act, pushing Chloe hard to the ground. Then, Mark, completely overwhelmed by fear, used a hard object found nearby to end the life of his closest friend. Sarah, who witnessed the entire event from a distance, was paralyzed with horror. She was trapped between 2 terrifying choices: exposing her 2 remaining friends and revealing the 2-year-old murder secret, or staying silent and becoming an accomplice to a new killing. David and Mark quickly acted, staging Chloe's death as a drunken fall while wandering in the woods. They fabricated false evidence, blaming the dangerous terrain. They threatened Sarah, ensuring her absolute silence. They returned to their tents and tried to sleep, but David, obsessed with Sarah's panic, began to fear that she too would not keep quiet. He whispered to Mark, "We need to make sure no one else knows about tonight." However, before they could act on Sarah, she acted first. In a moment of extreme panic and overwhelming rage, Sarah grabbed the handgun David always carried for protection and shot David while he was sleeping. Mark woke up to the sound of the gunshot. He saw David dead and Sarah trembling, pointing the gun at him. No words were exchanged. It was a moment of cold understanding. Only one person could survive with this secret. Mark lunged at Sarah in a desperate struggle. When dawn broke, only one person was alive. It was Sarah. She had killed her two best friends to protect herself and their old secret. She made it back to town, slightly injured, and told a horrifying story of a stranger's attack who had killed Chloe and David, and how she had miraculously escaped. However, the investigating detective found inconsistencies, especially regarding Sarah's injuries and the position of the bodies. More importantly, there were no footprints or evidence of a stranger at the crime scene. Ultimately, Sarah was charged. The camping trip tragedy exposed a brutal truth. A friendship built on a guilty secret is no friendship. It is a sinking ship. And when the storm hits, everyone is willing to kill for the only life raft. Story 6. The Online Victim. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight, we step into the dangerous world of the digital realm, where loneliness and blind trust become lethal tools. This is the horrifying story of Daniel S., an online predator, and his young victim, Emily W. Emily W. was a first-year college student who moved to a big city to pursue her dreams. She was an introvert, vulnerable, and felt profoundly lonely in her new environment. Like millions of other young people, she sought connection and validation on social media. That's when she met Alex M., a perfect online profile, a traveling photographer with refined taste, sharing beautiful pictures of adventurous trips and deep, insightful thoughts about life. Alex M. showed remarkable understanding of Emily's feelings. In reality, Alex M. did not exist. It was a fake identity created by Daniel S., a 35-year-old solitary office worker with a violent past and a sick, psychopathic mind. Daniel was neither handsome nor wealthy, like the image he fabricated, but he was a master of psychological manipulation. For months, Daniel built Emily's trust. He listened to her, complimented her, and empathized with her loneliness. He created a deep emotional connection, making Emily feel that Alex was the soulmate she had never had. This grooming process was a systematic act of predation. Daniel's goal was not money, but the sick gratification of controlling and destroying an innocent soul. Once he had completely won Emily's trust, Daniel began to push the relationship to a personal level. He said he was coming back to her city and wanted to meet her. Emily hesitated, but her desperate desire to meet her supposed soulmate prevailed, leading to her fatal mistake. They arranged to meet at a public cafe. Emily arrived, full of hope. But the person waiting for her was not the charming Alex M., but an ordinary middle-aged man with a less appealing appearance. Daniel had prepared a story. He claimed he was Alex's manager and that Alex was having car trouble on the way. He invited Emily back to Alex's apartment to wait. Emily felt uneasy, but her curiosity and belief in Alex led her to make the deadly mistake. She agreed to follow him. When Emily stepped into the dark apartment, she quickly realized she had been tricked. Daniel locked the door, and his friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a chilling smile. He told her the truth. Alex isn't real. There's only me, and you belong to me. The next hours were a nightmare. Emily realized Daniel's true nature, a brutal psychopath. He mentally and physically tortured her. Throughout the ordeal, Daniel used Emily's phone to send texts to her friends and family, pretending she was away traveling and would be out of contact for a few days. Ultimately, Daniel killed Emily. He meticulously disposed of her body, eliminating every physical piece of evidence that could directly link him to the victim. Emily's disappearance went unnoticed for several weeks. Detectives investigating the case realized that the last messages from Emily's phone didn't match her tone, and one of her friends noticed a small detail in the last selfie Emily sent, a wristwatch she had never seen her wear before. Investigators tracked the digital footprint of Alex M. and eventually traced it to Daniel S. When they searched his apartment, they didn't find the body, but they found a locked box containing chilling mementos, personal items, strands of hair, and photos of Emily and other victims he had hunted online. The wristwatch in the final photo was the very watch Daniel had been wearing. In the interrogation room, Daniel showed no remorse. He merely stated that manipulating their emotions was even more satisfying than killing them. He reveled in the process of turning trust into despair. The case of the online victim is a terrifying warning about the blurred lines between the real and virtual worlds. It teaches us that the most dangerous predator is not the one who breaks through the window, but the one who builds a bridge through the computer screen, exploiting trust and loneliness to destroy lives. Story 7. Nightfall in Suburbia. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we tell the story of an invisible terror that crept into every home, tearing apart the illusion of safety in a picture-perfect suburb. This is the tale of the Nightfall Killer in the town of Willow Creek. Willow Creek was the model small community. Perfectly manicured lawns, friendly families, and quiet streets where children rode their bikes safely. Residents here believed that crime was something that only happened in the distant city. That belief shattered one Saturday night. The first victim was Mrs. Helen M., a retired teacher living alone. Police initially suspected a botched robbery, but no valuables were taken. The killer left only one signature mark, a small, clean incision on the victim's wrist, made with a razor-sharp instrument. 2 weeks later, the second murder occurred. The victim was Mr. David L., a mail carrier. He was attacked while taking out the trash in the evening. Again, there was no clear motive, no robbery, no personal vendetta. Only an identical small cut on the wrist. Anxiety began to spread throughout Willow Creek. Residents locked their doors early, double-bolted every lock, and looked at their neighbors with suspicion. Police realized they were dealing with a serial killer, a predator with no discernible goal other than sowing fear. Detective Sergeant Torres was assigned to the case. He noticed an extremely frightening detail. The Nightfall Killer had no established pattern. He didn't choose victims based on age, gender, or social class. He struck randomly, based purely on opportunity. However, Torres uncovered a subtle pattern in the crimes. All attacks occurred between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., and all victims shared one single characteristic. They were alone and performing a mundane, routine activity, taking out the trash, checking the mail, or locking the garage door. The killer was not a stranger from the outside. He was someone intimately familiar with the routines and the false sense of security of this neighborhood. The third murder happened in a park near the school. The victim was Ms. Sarah K., a young mother walking her dog. That small, sharp incision reappeared, confirming the same perpetrator. Willow Creek descended into true panic. Life was paralyzed. Torres decided to focus on the murder weapon. Forensic analysis determined the cuts were made by a scalpel or an extremely sharp medical instrument. Torres began to look into people with easy access to such tools, doctors, nurses, or lab technicians. The investigation dragged on for weeks without success, until one night, as Torres was sitting in his surveillance car, he noticed something odd. A man, Michael B., a medical technician, frequently went for walks late at night. Michael B. was a quiet, unassuming neighbor. When Torres checked his records, he found Michael B. worked at a local medical lab. Torres decided to approach Michael B. discreetly. During the initial interview, Michael appeared completely normal, polite, and cooperative. But when Torres asked about his nighttime habits, Michael began to sweat. Torres posed a simple but probing question. Why do you enjoy walking around during the quietest time in Willow Creek, between 9 and 11 p.m.? Michael B. tried to cite insomnia, but Torres pressed him further. Finally, Torres presented his hypothesis. The Nightfall Killer didn't kill for hatred or money. He killed for the thrill of violating the absolute safety of the suburb, and the small incision was his signature, representing perfect control. Suddenly, Michael B. collapsed. He confessed. He explained that his life felt boring and meaningless. Killing randomly, with absolutely no motive, made him feel absolute power in a world where he otherwise felt invisible. He admitted to using a surgical scalpel stolen from his lab. The case of Nightfall in Suburbia is a chilling narrative. The killer was not a demon from hell, but an ordinary neighbor who turned their quiet life into a series of life and death games. It proves that the greatest threat often comes from the place we least expect. Story 8. The Price of Release. Welcome back to Confession Night. If episode 1 was about a father killing his son out of possession and control, tonight's story, The Price of Release, is a heartbreaking tragedy, an act of crime born from the most desperate form of love. This is the story of Matthew K. and his 13-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was a beautiful, intelligent girl, but she had been trapped by a rare and devastating terminal illness since she was 5 years old. The disease gradually stripped away her ability to move, communicate, and ultimately, any hope of survival. For years, Matthew and his wife dedicated all their time and money to fighting, hoping for a medical miracle. However, in Lily's final months, she suffered horrific and constant pain. High-dose painkillers were no longer effective. Lily, though unable to speak, conveyed a single message through her eyes and weak moans. "Daddy, I want it to stop." Matthew's wife, completely broken down, had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital after years of relentless stress. Matthew alone bore the burden of caring for his daughter, witnessing her unbearable torment every single day. He longed for his daughter's death, not to be free of the burden, but to end the suffering that modern medicine could no longer alleviate. Matthew began reading and researching physician-assisted death. Deep down, he believed his action was one of ultimate compassion. He saw himself not as a child killer, but as the one who would liberate his daughter from the torment of her disease. On a quiet Sunday night, after ensuring his wife could not return home and the house was silent, Matthew sat by Lily's bedside. He held his daughter, whispering final words of love, recalling the beautiful memories of her life before the illness. He administered a powerful dose of medication that he had secretly acquired from the hospital where Lily was treated. He injected the drug into his daughter's vein as gently as he could. Lily did not resist. She simply looked at her father, and a weak, tranquil smile appeared on her lips before she drifted into eternal sleep. The next morning, Matthew did not flee or try to stage the scene. He called the police, not to confess, but to report his daughter's passing. When the police arrived, they found Matthew sitting by the bed, holding his dead daughter's hand, his face utterly exhausted but strangely serene. The truth about the injection was quickly discovered. The case immediately sparked a massive ethical and legal debate in the United States. Was this a cold-blooded murder or an act of mercy? The prosecution charged Matthew with first-degree murder, asserting that regardless of the motive, the act of killing was a crime. The defense argued that Matthew acted under diminished responsibility due to extreme grief and boundless love for his daughter. They called it a mercy-killing case. At the trial, Matthew took the stand. He spoke of Lily's agonizing cries, the futility of medical intervention, and his daughter's silent plea. He said, "I signed a bill, paid for with my own freedom, so my daughter could find peace. I couldn't watch her suffer anymore. If that is a crime, I accept it." Matthew's story moved the jury and the public opinion. They understood that Matthew was not a killer driven by malice, but a father pushed to his absolute limit by life's tragedy. Ultimately, the jury delivered a more humane verdict, convicting Matthew of the lesser charge of manslaughter due to compassion, or even a suspended sentence conditional on intensive psychological treatment. The price of release is not a horror story about a monster. It is a horror story about the limits of human pain and the terrible choices that great love can force upon us. Story 9. The Truth Behind the Snow Veil. Welcome back to Confession Night. Tonight we tell the story of a disappearance that took place in the frigid, snow-covered mountains of Colorado, where nature's pristine beauty became a shroud for a ruthless crime. This is the tale of Claire D. and her mysterious husband, Thomas D. Claire D. was a young, promising architect. She and Thomas, a financial consultant, moved to a remote cabin in the mountains, seeking tranquility and fresh air. That winter, the snow fell relentlessly, isolating them from the outside world. One January morning, Thomas called the police. Claire had vanished. Thomas claimed he went out skiing in the morning, and when he returned, Claire was gone. The door was locked from the inside. There were no signs of a struggle, and her car was still in the garage. Thomas appeared extremely worried and distraught. He actively participated in the searches, appearing on television with tear-filled eyes, pleading for information from the public. He crafted the image of a desperate husband. However, Detective Henderson, the lead investigator, sensed something was wrong. Thomas was too calm, too much in control of his emotions, especially when recounting the details of the day his wife disappeared. Henderson discovered that Claire and Thomas were in the midst of a tense divorce. Claire had uncovered that Thomas had embezzled a significant amount of money from his client's retirement funds and was facing imminent prosecution. Claire planned to expose him and claim the cabin in the divorce settlement. For Thomas, being exposed meant not just losing money, but losing everything and going to prison. He needed to eliminate Claire permanently and leave no trace that could link him to the disappearance. Henderson determined that Claire could not have left on her own. There were no footprints in the deep snow other than Thomas's. The door was locked from the inside, but Thomas was the only one with a spare key. Clearly, Thomas had orchestrated a perfect vanishing act. Detective Henderson shifted the investigation to what Thomas had done with Claire's body. He noticed a strange detail in the cabin. Despite the freezing temperatures, the heater was turned up excessively high for the first 3 days after Claire vanished. Thomas explained it was to warm up the house after he returned from skiing. Henderson believed Thomas had killed his wife first, then used the cold snow to preserve the body for a short time. After reporting the disappearance, he used the time while police were searching outside to dispose of the body. The heavy snowfall was Thomas's accomplice. He had used an old snowmobile to transport the body and hide it in a more secluded area. However, Henderson focused on a small but crucial detail: the old snowmobile. Henderson requested a specialized search team to thoroughly examine the snowmobile. They found a tiny, faded stain beneath the seat paint. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Claire's blood. Cornered, Thomas remained silent. However, Henderson continued to press him. He pointed to the blood stain and said, "Claire didn't vanish, Thomas. You killed her to protect your financial secrets. You used the snow, you used the mountains to cover up your crime, but you couldn't cover up your greed." Finally, Thomas confessed. He recounted how he tricked Claire into taking a strong sedative, then strangled her while she was in a deep sleep. He kept the body in the cold storage shed for a day, then used the snowmobile to transport the body to a distant cliff and buried it under the thick snow layer. The case of the truth behind the snow veil is a gruesome testament to human coldness. Thomas used the beauty and isolation of nature as the setting for his crime, and his chilling composure almost allowed him to escape justice. Story 10. The Cycle of Violence. Welcome to the final episode of the Confession Night series. Tonight we won't discuss a single case, but the collapse of an entire lineage, a multi-generational tragedy known as the cycle of violence of the Morgan family. The Morgan family, living on an old, isolated farm in rural Kentucky, was always enveloped in a gloomy atmosphere. Violence was not an event in this family. It was a habit. The story begins with the grandfather, Senator Joseph Morgan, a powerful yet tyrannical man who frequently physically abused his wife and children. The son, Robert Morgan, grew up in fear and hatred of his father. When Joseph grew old and frail, Robert, haunted by his childhood trauma, murdered his father, staging it as a heart attack. Robert did this not for money, but to free himself and his mother from his father's grasp. Joseph's death was the first secret, the seed of malice planted in the family line. Robert, despite having killed his father, could not escape the violent nature he inherited. He became an oppressive father, controlling his wife and children through fear, repeating exactly what he had hated in his own father. Now we arrive at the third generation, Michael Morgan, Robert's son. Michael grew up witnessing his father's cruelty towards his mother and sisters. He was deeply traumatized and gradually developed a suppressed, violent tendency. The final tragedy occurred on Christmas Eve. The Morgan family gathered in the cabin, but there was no warmth, only tension poised to explode. Robert, in a drunken rage, began to verbally abuse and threaten his wife, repeating the very words his grandfather Joseph used. Witnessing this scene, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He saw his father not as a parent, but as the reflection of his tyrannical grandfather. A massive argument erupted. Michael grabbed an old hunting rifle that Robert often used to intimidate the family. Michael shot his father, ending Robert's cycle of violence. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Sarah Morgan, Michael's sister, also deeply traumatized, witnessed the entire event. She did not report her brother. Instead, she saw an opportunity to seek revenge for her mother and herself for years of torment. Sarah, in the chaos of the night, used the same rifle to kill her distraught mother. Her mother was a victim of abuse, but she was also the one who remained silent and enabled the violence to persist through 2 generations. In Sarah's mind, she was part of the chain of guilt. When the police and Detective Torres, who returned from episode 7, arrived at the scene, they found a horrific tableau. 2 bodies in the living room, and Michael and Sarah standing there, bloodied, completely blank. Both siblings were arrested. Through investigation, Torres gradually pieced together the Morgan family saga, the secret murder of the grandfather Joseph, Robert's subsequent abuse, and the psychological damage that created 2 generational killers. Michael and Sarah's confessions were not the usual expressions of remorse. They stated that they didn't kill people, they killed a curse. They believed that only by killing their parents could they prevent this cycle of violence from afflicting future generations. The cycle of violence is a gruesome testament to how crime and abuse, if left unhealed, become a family legacy, destroying everything in their path. We have navigated through 10 horrific stories of crimes committed among loved ones and in society. Each episode is a chilling reminder. The line between love, greed, and evil is much thinner than we dare to imagine. Thank you for joining Confession Night. See you in the next terrifying stories.